1990, the United Nations General Assembly designated October 1st as the International Day of Older Persons. In the 3 decades since then, the world itself is getting older not only because of the passage of time, but also because of the rapidly increasing number of people aged 60 years and older, which has now reached about 1 billion. 10 million older adults find themselves diagnosed with Alzheimer's each year. With no cure available today, how can we work together to bring about earlier diagnosis and more treatment options for patients? What does the near future hold for people with Alzheimer's? Our guest speakers, Genya, Head of Healthcare, World Economic Forum, and George Vradenburg, Convener, Global CEO Initiative on Alzheimer's Disease, will bring us their insights into this fatal illness.
So, George, it's so great to see you. What I want to do here is talk about an issue area that has touched so many of us, and that is dementia. And so I know this has been such a horrific disease for families, for healthcare systems, for economies, really. And some of the numbers that I've been looking at are that there are 50 million people with dementia right now, with 10 million coming every year. And a huge portion of that come from Alzheimer's. And so from your career in the fight against Alzheimer's, what are you seeing? What's your perspective here, and how serious this is, and what happens if we just kind of leave this at the status quo?
Well, I do think that this is a pandemic size problem, global in character, touching every nation. It is 50 million people, but it's really 50 million families. Because each of the persons with dementia, a 6 to 8 year disease that basically slowly erodes a person's brain, the capacity, their cognition, their ability to communicate, their ability to recognize reality, is a burden on an entire family and multiple generations of that family. So it's 50 million families, and that means 150 to 200 million people currently. And as you point out, that's going to triple by the mid-century. So it's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. We've done something really tremendous in the 20th century. We've extended life. Life expectancy has gone from roughly 50 years to close now to 80 years. And it sort of happened, incrementally. But we now have 6th-generation families, something that would have been unheard of 50 or 60 years ago. And increasingly, that's what we're going to see. Vibrant, healthy, energetic leadership across all sectors well into their 70s and 80s as a natural course. But one of the things that happens is that the dementia symptoms are more prevalent in older people, not the disease, which actually starts 20 to 30 years and in midlife, but 20 to 30 years before symptoms, but the actual symptoms of the disease. And so symptoms of Alzheimer's, which, as I say, are 6 to 8 years after diagnosis. And diagnosis sometimes is late. A good deal of the time it is late. And sometimes it can go up to 20 years. It is a horrific problem. 1 in 3 people, we believe, over 85 have dementia. And in fact, that will be growing through time as more and more and more people will live past 85 just as a natural course. Mm-hmm. Big problem.
And I know that recently we together launched the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. And I am curious to hear your perspective on why such a collaborative is so important for moving at speed and at scale to address what you've just painted for us as a massive and growing problem.
Dementia is one of the conditions of this aging population for which there is no cure, there is no treatment, and there's no disease modification. It is 100% fatal. So when you think of this as a pandemic-sized problem on the scale of COVID, more people are going to die this year. More people died last year from Alzheimer's than from COVID. And we have 100% mortality. So those numbers are going to grow every year, as we pointed out. So how do you attack something that is of that scale and of that geographic scope? I think you need a global mechanism. And COVID has demonstrated that with sufficient collaboration and international mechanisms, one can bring together enormous amount of resource and great collaborators to work simultaneously on drug development, advanced manufacturing, and regulators and vaccine developers, all in a, quite frankly, there have been every 2-week meetings of a committee that have brought all those people together over the last year. So we know that we can respond to pandemic size problems like COVID and I assert like Alzheimer's, but you need global mechanisms for collaboration. Because this is one that in fact requires researchers, it requires drug developers and companies, it requires governmental agencies and governmental funders, and you can't bring those together. It's not a natural act for all those people to be sitting in a room every 2 weeks saying, what is next? What is next? What is next? What do you need? How do we get this done? So we've learned from COVID that you can bring these things together, but they are global mechanisms with multiple sectors. It's sort of all hands on deck. And so a Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative is intended to begin that process of bringing more sectors together at a global level to look at the global problem.
Mm-hmm. And as we go global with that initiative and recognizing that demographics are really changing in some parts of the world, particularly with aging populations growing in size and in their needs, I am understanding that new technology and innovation will be a really big piece of how you can operationalize something like a Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative in ways that you might not have been able to do even that recently. So what is your expectation really in the role of tech and innovation in enabling a truly and transformatively global initiative?
Well, there is a good deal of great work going on in individual academic institutions. There's great work going on inside many national bodies, inside countries. But because of these isolated efforts, all of which are extraordinarily important, we need to link them to get the scale and the geographic scope that we need. As you know, the genetic studies that have been done in Alzheimer's, 90% of those studies have been done in populations of Western European legacy. 90% of the people of the world are not Western European legacy. How is it that we can bring the tools that have been developed in the high resource countries to low resource countries or middle income countries, and at the same time learn from those middle and low income countries what is best for their populations and how Alzheimer's and dementia might work in their particular ethnic populations and racial populations. To link all of that requires new linking systems. It requires new data sharing systems. It requires biorepository systems. It requires clinical trial networks at a global level, not just in Western Europe and the United States. And it requires health system changes around the world to assure that when we do get some disease modifying drugs, which I believe are going to be on the market very, very soon, and certainly within the next 2 to 3 years, that health systems are able to detect those people with the disease before they have symptoms so that we can introduce the medicines in those populations at the right time in the course of the disease and prevent symptoms from ever occurring.
And I have heard and have experienced, probably as you have as well, the burden of caregiving when it comes to populations with dementia. And you've elaborated on the hope that we would be able to identify people at risk or who might be starting to go down that path much, much sooner and even head that off, right? So there might be the opportunity there for a lot of saving of costs and burdens on families. But I am wondering from your perspective, as we involve families in this work and patient advocacy groups are often a great place to start there. What is the special role in the Alzheimer's space to leverage the families who have long histories of Alzheimer already, or who might be worried that this might be coming down the pipeline at them?
Well, you mentioned technology. We're now going to introduce through the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative new digital biomarkers, voice biomarkers. The most ubiquitous tool in the hands of people around the world are the smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, we now know, based upon studies, that your voice cadence and your voice capacity changes with cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now capable using new technologies, potentially to identify people very early in the course of the disease, getting them into clinical trials, getting them to doctors to advise them on a variety of risk reduction strategies for themselves and their families, maybe much more earlier in the course of this disease. One of the problems we're confronting is the Alzheimer's Disease International did a massive survey around the world. 2/3 of people around the world believe that Alzheimer's and dementia are the natural consequences of aging. That it's not a disease that you can cure, it's just what happens when you get old. And remarkably, 2/3 of the clinicians around the world believe that it's futile to even think of or talk about this disease with their patients because they don't think there's anything they can do. There are things they can do, and families can get involved. They can recognize the earliest possible signs. They can get their loved ones into hopeful global clinical trials, right? We did global clinical trials with COVID. Why aren't we doing this with Alzheimer's? Why is it that we need to wait till somebody's 2/3 of the way through the disease and try and treat them after, in fact, they're in stage 4 or stage 5, or what we would call, we've been trained to, as increasingly that if you discover a disease earlier, you can treat it, more likely to be able to treat it or stop it. Digital technologies are good alert systems for people, so that in fact people can be reminded of things. Digital technologies can detect unusual movements inside a house. Digital technologies can follow people in ways, if they begin to wander, that alerts people to the possibility that their loved one's at risk. So new technologies that are developed in the high resource countries now can be introduced in low resource countries and enable them to participate in the efforts to cure this disease and to support the families that are experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you made an analogy to HIV/AIDS, and we all know that it was tremendous pressure from patient groups, particularly on regulatory and policymakers, who were able to make some of the most passionate and biggest changes in the system and mobilize resources. Do you see analogies to how we might be able to leverage patient groups when it comes to policymakers and possibly even to regulatory systems that may not be ready for this, or maybe going down one pathway that is not leading the results that you'd like to see?
There are, in many countries of the world, Alzheimer's societies or associations that represent patients in that country. And I do believe that they're capable of being mobilized. They're all inside one organization called Alzheimer's Disease International. And Alzheimer's Disease International has been a leader in this field. They're partners in this Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. And the answer is yes. We will have a Champions Council that will be part of the Swiss Foundation that is going to manage this effort. And part of that Champions Council will be patient groups. Because you're absolutely right. If we could if you really thought we could mobilize 50 million families around the world to say to their governments, why in the hell aren't you doing more about this? Governments would get more involved. So part of this effort is to assess whether or not we can use patient representatives or ultimately patients and families themselves to mobilize a political movement that will in fact alter the current priority the governments are not putting on Alzheimer's and dementia.
Mm-hmm. And if we have members out in the audience whose organizations might be interested in joining you in this fight, or in the collaborative aiming towards addressing this issue at a global level, what would you say to them? Who are you missing from this coalition that you wish you really had?
Well, we have researchers, we have companies, we will have patient organizations. We need governments. So I think those, now that does not necessarily mean the head of state, but we do need serious senior players in governments to begin to think through how they can view this disease in a much more present way than they currently do. So we are looking for companies and innovators in the diagnostic space, in the digital biomarker space, in the digital linking space, data sharing companies. We're also looking for governments to themselves get involved in the effort, because this is not where one sector can solve this. This is not where one government's going to solve it. It's not where one company is going to solve it. It is really a whole of society effort that we need to mobilize. And that means, quite frankly, anyone out there that is attending this forum would be a useful participant. So www.DavosAlzheimersCollaborative.org.
And where do you think we will be in 2030, 2040? What's your vision for how fast we need to move and how fast we can move?
Clearly, we need to move faster than we're moving today. Alzheimer's was defined as a disease until the late 70s. That's over, was that late 70s, 1980 would be 40 years ago. We have not made any progress. No cure, no treatment, no disease-modifying drugs. We will have multiple disease-modifying drugs of different kinds on the market by 2030. And I believe by 2040, we will begin to demonstrate significant efforts that will prevent this disease. Will we prevent it globally? I would also say, if you thought you could save the lives of 150 million people and their families, how much effort would you personally put into trying to do that? Think of the emotional satisfaction. Think of what you do for your family. Think of what you do for your friends. Think what you would do for mankind and womankind if we could actually prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's. We could add 10 years to people's lives with a healthy brain, many more years with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, many more years with a loving spouse, many more years of purposeful activity, either in a marketplace or philanthropically or just life. This is a goal that we have to commit ourselves to, and commit ourselves with passion, recognize that we haven't got a fast answer, but recognizing that if we don't act now with passion and commitment, we're never going to get to a world without Alzheimer's.
All right. So, George, one of the things that I was really curious about was the cost aspect related to Alzheimer's. Not only the cost to economies of the caregiving, of taking people out of the workforce during, as you've pointed out, very productive years, but also how do we think about access to the screening and the treatments for people in low and middle income countries, where you've pointed out that so much of this burden is and will continue to grow in?
Well, there's a number of ways to tackle this. So the first one is just macroeconomics. With increasing percentages of national populations that are over 60 or 65, past, quote, retirement age, whatever it might be in a country. Smaller percentages of national populations are of working age. As a consequence, in order to support those older populations with a smaller tax-paying base, we're going to have to raise taxes. We're also going to have to increase the productivity of the working age populations, which means lower interest rates. Now, if you look at global national budgets now, fiscal budgets are already strained, huge deficits. Monetary policy is as liberal as you can make it. So the impact on global economic growth overall is going to be impacted by this changing demographic. And as you note, working age populations productive workers are going to be drawn out of that workforce to provide care for those older populations, and as a result, go into very low productivity, low productive activity in the sense of economic productiveness, high social productivity, but low. So that's a major problem. The annual global cost now is about $1.3 trillion. It will double every 10 years. So there is a huge, just plain cost to society that is in the United States going to approach the size of our defense budget in the coming decades. And then third, what's the cost to families? And now, depending on where you are, in lower resource countries, costs to families can run from 10 to 15,000 a year to hundreds of thousands a year. And that means that, in fact, many families will become destitute as a consequence of this disease. So there are a lot of economic as well as the obvious social consequences. So there's a lot of economic consequence to failing to deal with this disease in an impactful manner.
Mm-hmm. And then ethically speaking, making sure that the treatments that are coming out the pipeline are available for populations who need them.
There's no question that the initial drugs that are coming through the pipeline will be expensive. They'll require infusions, that is like a cancer infusion. And so new techniques to get those infusion products to populations in low income populations and in low resource countries is going to require a massive change in our health systems. Now, the first set of drugs, as I say, will be expensive, but there are drugs in the pipeline which are going to be less expensive. They will be pills. And so those are being tested now, and they will be coming. As soon as we begin to get success, I think that you're going to see a burst of innovation in this space as investment moves into it. The unmet need is gigantic. The economic opportunities for successful companies is great. And the benefits to society of having an innovation chain, a pipeline of innovations, which improves both reduces the cost, improves the efficacy and effectiveness of these drugs, is vitally important as a matter of national policy.
And if I was a policymaker in a Ministry of Health or in a finance ministry in some of these countries that have the goal of universal health coverage, knowing that these populations are going to soon appear in my budgets, where should I be looking to form partnerships or find creative solutions with, say, social impact investors or those wealthy family foundations that you raised up recently? Have you been thinking through some of those creative models that might work specifically in lower middle income countries?
We have, I would say the first place to go is the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, www.davosalzheimerscollaborative.com. But the answer is yes. We need innovation, rapid innovation in testing and diagnostics, screening techniques and diagnostics. Then we need to put an all sort of world effort behind how to assure that innovative medicines and treatments that come through the pipeline are made available broadly. But we do need, that is to say, that we need to detect the people earlier in the course of the disease and through new blood-based markers and digital biomarkers that are much, much more accessible and much, much more affordable than the imaging equipment that we use in high resource countries. So this is very much on our mind, reducing the cost of detection, reducing the cost of diagnosis, and very much in mind how to develop new styles of home-based care and other techniques that will make new medicines that come through the pipeline more accessible to low-income populations in all countries of the world, but also low resource countries.
Thank you. That's really great to hear and definitely fits within the mission of the World Economic Forum, which is to ensure that there is equity in access to these kinds of advances and treatments. It's good to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, at Klaus Schwab and your organization has been great champions of stakeholder capitalism, that business has a social purpose. This is one of those things where one of those great challenges where we need corporations, individuals, and governments to put their social purpose hat on and recognize what they can do to reduce the suffering of the world that's occurring now and which will double and triple in the coming decades.
Well, thank you, George. I know that everyone listening and watching will be very inspired. And probably, as you have pointed out from the figures, they know someone in their family. They've been personally touched by this. And we hope that through your remarks and the work that we've been doing together in a multi-stakeholder way, using the forum's ability to bring together various constituencies and foster collaboration at the global level, that we will get there where you want to be 2030 and 2040. So thank you very much for your commitment and for your passion in this space.
Thank you, Genia. And I must say, the partnership with the World Economic Forum has been not only productive and fast moving, but is very, very congenial. We meet weekly with you and your colleagues, and as a consequence, we've gotten to know them well. We like them, we love them, and we love the fact that we have common purpose and that we're jointly committed to solving this disease. So thank you, World Economic Forum.